The war ended not with triumph, but with silence. 3 days had passed since the final battle of the Red War, and the kingdom of Valdris stood upon a throne built from ash and bone. The wolves had won, the humans had burned, and somewhere between victory and devastation, the line separating conqueror from survivor had blurred beyond recognition. Elara Ashford stood in the center of a field hospital that no longer served any purpose. The tents sagged under the weight of morning dew. The cots lay empty, stripped of their bloodied linens. The smell of death still clung to the canvas walls, a ghost that refused to depart, no matter how many times she scrubbed her hands raw. She was 32 years old, though the war had carved decades into her eyes. Her hair, the color of autumn wheat, hung loose around shoulders that had learned to carry burdens no woman should bear. Her hands, steady as stone when they worked, now trembled slightly as she packed the last of her medical supplies into a leather satchel worn soft by years of use. She was not merely a healer. That title had never captured the truth of what she did. During the 4 years of the Red War, Elara had designed and coordinated the entire medical evacuation system for the Human Alliance, 200 field stations, 3,000 healers under her command, supply lines that stretched across 3 territories, maintained through blizzards and sieges and desperate midnight retreats. She had created protocols that saved soldiers who should have died. She had trained assistants who went on to save thousands more. Her survival rate was the highest in recorded history. Generals had consulted her, commanders had deferred to her judgment, and none of it had mattered in the end, because strategy meant nothing against an enemy that could tear through armor with bare claws. The humans had lost. Her people had burned. And now the Wolf King wanted her. The summons had arrived at dawn, carried by a messenger whose golden eyes marked him as one of the conquered. He had handed her a scroll sealed in black wax, bearing the royal crest of Valdris, a claw piercing a crown. The symbol of the Iron Vein dynasty, the symbol of the man who had ordered her village destroyed 5 years before the war even began. Elara had stared at that seal for a long time before breaking it. The message inside was brief, written in a hand that suggested education and impatience in equal measure. She was to present herself at the palace within 3 days. She was to bring her medical equipment. She was to tell no one of her destination. There was no signature. There did not need to be. But beneath the formal text, someone had added a single line in different ink, written hastily as though the sender feared changing their mind. "Bring your records from River's Bend. Your people did not die in vain, as you believe." River's Bend. The name struck her like a physical blow. River's Bend had been her greatest achievement and her deepest shame. A single night when 800 wounded soldiers had been brought to her station, more than triple her capacity. She had worked for 36 hours without rest, reorganizing triage protocols on the fly, converting supply wagons into surgical theaters, training kitchen staff to hold sutures. She had saved every single one of them. What she had not known, what she had refused to let herself consider, was that 200 of those soldiers had been wolves. Enemy combatants who had been separated from their unit, wearing stolen human uniforms to avoid execution. She had healed them alongside her own people, never asking which side they served, never caring about anything except the blood that needed stopping. How did the Wolf King know about that? Why did it matter to him now? She could have refused the summons. The war was over, and the terms of surrender said nothing about forcing healers into service. She could have disappeared into the refugee camps, found passage on a ship to the southern islands, started a new life far from wolf territory. But the truth was, Elara Ashford had nowhere left to go. Her mother was dead, killed when Ashford Valley burned. Her father had died in the first year of the war, taken by plague that swept through the camps. Her brothers had fallen at different battles, their bodies never recovered. The only family she had left were the ghosts that walked beside her, and ghosts could follow you anywhere. So she packed her supplies, she mounted the horse provided by the messenger, and she rode toward the palace of the man she had sworn to hate until her dying breath, the Wolf King, Cale Ironvein, the beast of Valdris, the murderer of everyone she had ever loved. The journey took 2 days. The roads that led to the capital had been cleared of debris, but the evidence of war remained visible in every direction. Burned farmhouses stood like blackened skeletons against the gray sky. Fields that should have been golden with harvest lay fallow and scarred. The few travelers she encountered moved with the shuffling gait of the defeated, their eyes empty of hope. Elara rode past them without stopping. There was nothing she could offer them now. Her healing hands could close wounds, but they could not repair shattered spirits. Her medical knowledge could fight infection, but it was powerless against the disease of despair. By the time she reached the palace, the sun had begun its descent toward the western mountains. The fortress of Valdris rose before her like a monument to power, its black stone walls catching the dying light and transforming it into something that resembled bleeding gold. Towers pierced the sky like raised fists. Banners bearing the Iron Vein crest snapped in the evening wind. It was beautiful in the way that a predator is beautiful, elegant and terrifying and utterly without mercy. The guards at the main gate examined her papers with expressions of barely concealed contempt. They were wolves, of course, young males with the arrogance of the victorious, their golden eyes tracking her movements as though she were prey that had wandered too close to the den. One of them sneered as he handed back her documents. Another human healer. How many more will the king waste his time on? Elara did not respond. She had learned long ago that engaging with hostility only prolonged it. Instead, she guided her horse through the gate and into the outer courtyard, where more guards waited to escort her inside. The palace interior was as imposing as its exterior suggested. Marble floors stretched in every direction, polished to such brilliance that she could see her own reflection walking beneath her. Torch brackets lined the walls, their flames burning with the steady intensity of enchanted fire. Paintings of former kings stared down from gilded frames, their eyes seeming to follow her as she passed. She was not taken to the throne room. Instead, her escort led her through a maze of corridors that grew progressively darker and colder, until they reached a section of the palace that felt abandoned by time itself. Here, the torch flames burned lower. The paintings had been replaced by empty frames. The marble gave way to rough-hewn stone that bore the marks of centuries. This was the old wing, the section of the palace that predated the Iron Vein dynasty, the place where, according to legend, the first wolves had made their home when they were still considered monsters rather than kings. Her escort stopped before a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands. "Wait here," he said, then disappeared down the corridor without explanation. Elara stood alone in the silence, her satchel growing heavy on her shoulder. The cold seeped through her traveling clothes, raising bumps along her arms. She could hear nothing from beyond the door, not voices or movement or even breathing. It occurred to her, not for the first time, that she might have walked willingly into a trap. The door opened. A man stood on the other side, and for a moment Elara forgot how to breathe. He was older than she had expected, perhaps 50 or so, with a face that bore the evidence of decades spent at war. A scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, a pale line against weather-darkened skin. His eyes were gray, not the gold of active wolf blood, and they held a weariness that seemed to go beyond simple exhaustion. He wore the uniform of a military commander, but the insignia on his shoulder marked him as something more, a wolf crossed with twin swords. The symbol of the commander of the King's Guard. "You are Elara Ashford," he said. It was not a question. "I am." He studied her for a long moment, his gaze moving from her face to her hands to the satchel on her shoulder. Whatever he was looking for, he seemed to find it. "I am Commander Theron," he said. "I have served beside the king for 35 years. He paused, something flickering in those gray eyes. "He does not have much time left." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "Time before what?" Elara asked. The commander did not answer directly. Instead, he stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. "See for yourself." The chamber beyond the door was vast and dark, lit only by a fire that burned low in an enormous hearth. The flames cast dancing shadows across walls lined with weapons, shields, and the mounted heads of creatures Elara did not recognize. A war room, she realized, a place where battles had been planned and victories celebrated and defeats mourned. And at its center, seated in a chair that might as well have been a throne, was the Alpha King. Chaol Ironvein did not look like a monster. That was Elara's first thought, and it surprised her with its intensity. She had spent years imagining the man who had ordered her village destroyed. In her mind, he had become something inhuman, a beast wearing the shape of a man, a creature of pure malice and cruelty, incapable of anything resembling mercy. The reality was disturbingly different. He was perhaps 45, built with the solid muscle of a warrior who had never stopped training. His hair was dark, touched with gray at the temples, and it fell in waves to his shoulders. His face was handsome in a brutal sort of way, all sharp angles and strong bones, but there was no arrogance in his expression, no cruelty. What she saw instead was pain. His left shoulder was bare, the shirt torn away to reveal a wound that made her healer's instincts immediately alert. The injury was deep, cutting through muscle and exposing bone in places. But that was not what troubled her. It was the color of the flesh around it. The edges had turned black, not with infection, but with something else. Something that pulsed with a faint, sickly light. And the veins that spread from the wound, stretching across his chest like the roots of a poisoned tree, were the same horrible shade. "You are the healer from River's Bend," the king said. His voice was lower than she had expected, rougher, as though speaking required effort. His golden eyes, the true gold of alpha blood, fixed upon her with an intensity that felt almost physical. "I am. Do you know why you are still alive?" The question caught her off guard. She had prepared herself for threats, for intimidation, for the casual cruelty she associated with wolf nobility. She had not prepared for this. "Because I am skilled at what I do," she said. "Wrong." The king pushed himself to his feet, the movement slow and careful, as though any sudden motion might shatter him. He was taller than her by a head, and even wounded, even dying, he radiated power in a way that made the air itself feel heavier. "You are alive because I ordered that no one was to touch the healer of River's Bend. 800 soldiers survived that night. 200 of them were mine." The confirmation of what she had suspected hit her like a blow. She had saved enemy combatants. She had healed the very wolves who might have gone on to kill her own people. And somehow, impossibly, that was why she was here. "You did not ask which side they served before you saved them," the king continued. He took a step towards her, then another, each movement clearly costing him. "You did not care about anything except stopping the blood. That is why I summoned you. To heal you? To try." He stopped before her, close enough that she could see the sweat beading on his forehead, the slight tremor in his hands. The wound on his shoulder was worse up close, the black veins pulsing with each beat of his heart. "Before I allow you to touch me, you should know something. Every healer who has tried before you is dead." Elara's stomach tightened, but she did not step back. "You killed them?" "No." A shadow crossed his face. "They killed themselves. Or rather, the thing inside me did." She looked at the wound again, really looked at it this time. The pattern of the injury was wrong. This was not the result of a sword or claw or arrow. The edges were too precise, too symmetrical. This was not a battle wound. This was the mark of a ritual. "Who did this to you?" she asked. The king's jaw tightened. "My brother." The words fell into the silence like stones dropped into still water. Commander Theron, still standing by the door, made a sound that might have been agreement or grief. "Lord Chaol Ironvein," the commander said. "He was supposed to be king before the power chose Chaol instead. He has never accepted that decision." Elara's mind raced. She had heard of Chaol, of course, the elder brother who had been passed over for the throne, the lord who controlled half the council despite having no formal power, the shadow that lurked behind every political decision in Valdris. "He tried to extract your alpha power," she said. It was not a question. He tried. The king's voice was flat. He failed, but he left something behind. Moonfire. The word escaped her before she could stop it, dragged from memories of ancient texts she had studied in her youth. Moonfire was legend, a poison so potent that it was said to consume not just the body, but the soul itself. It fed on the essence of its victim, growing stronger with every heartbeat until there was nothing left but an empty shell. There was no cure for Moonfire. There had never been a cure. The king smiled, and it was the most terrible expression Elara had ever seen. Not because it was cruel, but because it was resigned. "You know what it is. Good. That saves time. You are asking me to cure the incurable. No. I am offering you an opportunity." He turned away from her, moving toward a table where documents lay scattered in disorganized piles. His movements were slower now, the effort of standing clearly taking its toll. "You hate me," he said without looking at her. "You have every reason to. Ashford Valley burned on my order. Your mother died in those flames." Elara's hands clenched at her sides. "Yes, you came here wanting answers, wanting to understand why, perhaps wanting revenge." He picked up a scroll and turned to face her again. The firelight caught his eyes, making them burn like molten gold. "I am offering you both. Heal me, and I will give you access to every classified document relating to Ashford Valley, every order, every report, every secret that I have buried for 5 years. And if I fail, then you die, and you take your answers to the grave with you." It was a terrible bargain, a trade of service for knowledge, with death as the only alternative. Any sensible person would refuse. Any sensible person would flee this palace and never look back. But Elara had stopped being sensible the day her village burned. "And you," she said slowly, "if I succeed, what do you get?" The king met her gaze, and for a moment the mask of power slipped. What she saw beneath it was not the monster she had imagined. It was a man who had been fighting alone for far too long. "Time," he said. "Enough time to set my kingdom in order before my brother tears it apart." There was truth in those words. Elara could hear it in his voice, see it in the set of his shoulders. He was not offering her a deal out of desperation or cruelty. He was offering her the only thing he had left to give. The fire crackled in the silence. Commander Theron remained motionless by the door. The shadows danced their endless dance across the walls. Elara thought of her mother, who had taught her that every life was worth saving. She thought of her brothers, who had died fighting wolves on distant battlefields. She thought of the 800 soldiers she had healed at River's Bend, 200 of whom had been enemies she never knew. She thought of all the reasons she should say no. And then she set down her satchel and began to roll up her sleeves. "Show me the wound," she said. The examination took nearly an hour. Elara worked in silence, her hands moving with the practiced precision of someone who had treated thousands of injuries. She cleaned the wound. She tested the flesh around it. She pressed her fingers against the black veins and felt the cold that pulsed within them, a cold that should not exist in any living body. The king endured her examination without complaint. He sat in his chair with the stillness of a man accustomed to pain, his only reaction an occasional tightening of his jaw when she touched a particularly sensitive area. Commander Theron brought her supplies when she asked for them: hot water, clean cloth, a collection of herbs that the palace healers had assembled. She worked through each item methodically, testing, analyzing, searching for any weakness in the poison's grip. She found none. Moonfire was worse than the legend suggested. It was not simply a poison that killed. It was a living thing, a parasite that had woven itself into the king's very essence. It fed on his strength, his will, his life force. Every beat of his heart gave it more power. Every breath he took pulled him closer to death. And yet, somehow he was still alive. Still. "That should not be possible," she murmured, more to herself than to him. The king opened his eyes. He had closed them somewhere during the examination, his face relaxing into something that almost resembled peace. "What should not be possible? You should be dead. Moonfire kills within days. You have been carrying this for weeks. She saw it in the scarring around the wound, in the depth of the black veins, in the way his body had adapted to fighting an enemy it could not defeat. This was not a fresh injury. This was a war of attrition that had been raging inside him for a month or more. Longer, he said. 2 months since my brother's ritual failed. 2 months. The word was absurd. No one survived Moonfire for 2 months. How? She asked. The king was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and heavy with something that sounded almost like shame. The Alpha Power. It fights the poison. Every day, every hour, every moment. It burns through my strength to keep me alive. But it is losing. The Alpha Power. The legendary force that made Wolf Kings more than mortal. The essence that passed from ruler to ruler, choosing its vessel based on criteria that no one fully understood. It had chosen Kyle over his older brother, and now it was being consumed trying to save him. Why did he do this? Elara asked. Your brother. If he wanted the power, killing you would only pass it to the next in line. He would not receive it. The king's expression twisted. He believed he could take it. There are old rituals, forbidden ones, that claim to allow the transfer of alpha essence from one vessel to another. My brother has spent his life studying them. And they do not work. They do not work, the king confirmed. But Kalen has never been one to accept reality when it conflicts with his desires. There was bitterness in those words, but also something else, something that might have been grief. This was not simply a political rivalry between brothers. This was a family destroying itself from within. Elara filed that information away for later. Right now she had more immediate concerns. I cannot cure you, she said bluntly. There is no cure for Moonfire. Every text I have ever read agrees on that. I know, but I can try to slow it further, buy you more time. If your alpha power is already fighting the poison, I may be able to support that fight. Strengthen your body so the power has more to work with. The king studied her face. You are not lying. You actually believe you can help. I believe I can try. Whether I succeed is another matter. She expected him to demand guarantees, to threaten consequences if she failed. That was what rulers did. That was what the monster she had imagined would do. Instead, he simply nodded. Then try, he said. I have nothing left to lose. She began that night. The treatment she devised was not elegant. It was brutal, exhausting work that required her to pour every ounce of her skill into a battle she was not certain she could win. She used herbs that stimulated the body's natural defenses, compounds that boosted strength and endurance, techniques that she had developed during the war for soldiers on the edge of death. The king submitted to her ministrations without resistance. He swallowed the bitter tonics she prepared. He endured the painful poultices she applied. He sat motionless as she worked her hands across his wounded flesh, willing life into tissue that wanted only to die. And somewhere in the middle of that first night, as her palms pressed against his fevered skin, something happened that neither of them expected. Elara felt it first, a pulse of energy that shot through her hands and into her bones, carrying with it sensations that did not belong to her, rage and sorrow and desperate determination, the weight of a crown that had never fit properly, the loneliness of a throne surrounded by enemies, the grief of a man who had lost everyone he ever cared about and was about to lose himself. She gasped and tried to pull away, but her hands would not move. They were locked against his chest, as though held by invisible chains, and the visions kept coming. She saw a boy standing in a field of corpses, his eyes glowing gold for the first time, as power he had never asked for flooded through him. She saw a young man refusing to execute prisoners, being beaten nearly to death by an older brother who called him weak. She saw a general standing alone on a hilltop, watching an army march into a valley that would soon become an inferno, his face carved from stone while his soul screamed in silence. She saw Ashford Valley burning, and she understood in that moment that the man who had ordered the destruction was not the same man who had wanted it. The visions stopped as suddenly as they had begun. Elara wrenched her hands away, stumbling backward until she collided with the wall. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The king stared at her, his face pale beneath the sweat of fever. "You saw," he said. It was not a question. "What was that? What did you do to me?" "I did nothing." He looked down at his hands, and for the first time, Elara saw fear in his expression. That was the bond. Commander Theron stepped forward, his face grim. "Show me your wrist, healer." Elara extended her arm without thinking, still too shaken to question the command. What she saw made her blood run cold. A mark had appeared on her skin. A circle of gold, faint but unmistakable, etched into her flesh as though drawn by invisible fire. And within that circle, the outline of a wolf's eye. She looked at the king. An identical mark glowed at his wrist, pulsing in rhythm with her own. "The mate bond," Commander Theron said, his voice heavy with implications Elara did not yet understand. "After 40 years, the power has finally found you a match." "No." The king stood abruptly, the movement sending him staggering. "This cannot be. She is human." "The bond does not care about blood," the commander replied. "It cares about essence, about compatibility, about fate." Fate! The word was almost laughable. Elara had stopped believing in fate the day her village burned. She believed in choices, in consequences, in the brutal arithmetic of action and reaction. And yet here she was, marked by a magic older than kingdoms, bound to a man she had sworn to hate. "What does this mean?" she demanded. "What has been done to me?" The king turned to face her, and she saw in his eyes the same confusion she felt, the same anger, the same fear. "It means our lives are connected," he said slowly. "The mate bond is not like marriage or oath. It is not a promise that can be broken. It is a merging of essence. Your heart beats in rhythm with mine. Your strength supplements my own. And your weakness," she realized with dawning horror. "Your pain. I will feel those too." "Yes." She looked at the moonfire wound, at the black veins pulsing toward his heart. "If that poison kills you," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "it will kill me as well." The king met her gaze. "Yes." The next hour passed in a blur of explanations and implications. Commander Theron, who had witnessed the bond formation with the same shock as the participants, did his best to explain what had happened and what it meant. The mate bond was ancient, older than the Iron Vein dynasty, older perhaps than the wolf race itself. It was the power's way of ensuring the survival of the Alpha line, connecting rulers to partners whose essence complemented their own. It was rare, appearing once in a generation if at all, and it was always regarded as sacred. But it had never, in all of recorded history, connected a wolf to a human. Until now. "The bond is not a simple connection," Theron continued. He had brought chairs for both of them, recognizing that neither was in any state to stand. "It creates what the old texts call a mirror. You will feel what he feels. You will see what he sees. In time, you may even share thoughts without speaking." "That sounds like possession," Elara said flatly. "It sounds like partnership," the commander countered. "The bond does not control. It connects. What you do with that connection is your choice." She looked at the king, who had been silent since the initial revelation. He sat in his chair with the stillness of a man in shock, his golden eyes fixed on some point in the distance. "Is there any way to break it?" she asked. He stirred at that, turning to look at her. "No." The word fell like a stone. Once formed, the bond cannot be severed. Not by distance, not by ritual, not by death itself. When one partner dies, the other follows within hours. So I am trapped. We are both trapped. His voice held no accusation, no anger, only exhaustion. "I did not ask for this, healer. I did not want it. If I could undo it, I would. But you cannot." "No." They stared at each other across the width of the room. Two people who should have been enemies, bound together by magic neither understood. Elara thought about running. She could leave this palace, put miles between herself and this impossible situation. Perhaps distance would weaken the bond. Perhaps time would dissolve it. But even as she considered it, she knew it was pointless. The bond was already settling into her bones, weaving itself into the fabric of her being. She could feel the king's heartbeat pulsing beneath her own, steady and slow and somehow comforting. And she remembered the visions. The boy who had become a killer not by choice, but by circumstance. The man who had ordered her village burned while his soul screamed in protest. She had come here wanting answers. The bond had given her something far more dangerous. It had given her understanding. "I will stay," she said finally. The king blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "You have every reason to leave, to hate me, to let the moonfire finish its work. I have many reasons to do all of those things." She stood, moving toward the door. "But I also have questions that need answers, and now, it seems, I have a bond that will kill me if I abandon you. That is not a reason to stay. That is a reason to run faster." "Perhaps." She paused at the doorway, looking back at him. "But I am a healer, Your Majesty. I spent 4 years saving lives that others had given up on. I did not ask whose side they served before I treated them. I did not care whether they deserved to live." She thought of River's Bend, of the 200 wolves she had healed without knowing, without caring, without questioning. "I cannot cure Moonfire," she continued. "No one can, but I can fight it. I can buy you time. And while I do, you will give me access to the records of Ashford Valley, every document, every secret, everything. You want the truth about why your village burned. I want the truth about everything, and then I will decide what to do with it." The king studied her for a long moment. Then slowly a smile crossed his face. It was not a pleasant expression, but there was something genuine in it, something almost resembling respect. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Elara Ashford. I have been called both." She turned away. "Rest tonight. I will begin serious treatment tomorrow. And Commander," she added, glancing at Theron, "I will need access to your medical archives, all of them." The commander nodded. "It will be arranged." She left the chamber without looking back, her mind churning with possibilities and fears and the strange, unwelcome warmth of a heartbeat that no longer belonged to her alone. That night, in the small room she had been assigned in the guest wing, Elara did not sleep. She sat by the window and watched the moon rise over the mountains, thinking about fate and choice and the 1,000 small decisions that had led her to this moment. The mark on her wrist glowed faintly in the darkness. She could feel the king's presence at the edge of her awareness, a distant warmth that pulsed in rhythm with her own heart. She hated him. She had spent 5 years hating him, building that hatred into a fortress around her grief. He had ordered her village destroyed. Her mother had died screaming in flames that he had commanded. But the visions had shown her something else, something more complicated than simple hatred could accommodate. The man who had given the order was not the same as the man who had wanted it. And that distinction, she was beginning to realize, might make all the difference. Commander Theron came to her room at midnight, carrying a wooden chest bound with iron. "The king asked me to give you this," he said, "before you begin treatment tomorrow." "What is it?" "Answers. Some of them, at least." He set the chest on her table and departed without another word. Elara stared at the chest for a long time before opening it. When she finally lifted the lid, she found a collection of documents that told a story far more complicated than she had ever imagined. Reports from 5 years ago detailing intelligence about Ashford Valley, maps showing its location relative to other territories, census records listing its population of healers and their families, and a letter written in a hand she now recognized as the king's own. The letter was addressed to his brother, Lord Kalen, and it was a flat refusal. A denial of the order to destroy the valley. A demand for alternatives, for negotiations, for anything except slaughter. "I will not murder innocents to prevent a prophecy that may never come true," the letter read. "Find another way, or accept that some threats cannot be eliminated through force." The letter was dated 3 days before Ashford Valley burned. But the valley had still burned, and the king had taken the blame. At the bottom of the chest, beneath all the documents, Elara found one final piece of paper. It was not a report or an order, but a personal note, written in the same hand as the letter. The prophecy speaks of a child born with the blood of 2 thrones, human and wolf. This child will either end the Alpha line forever or save both races from destruction. Find the child. Protect it, no matter the cost." And beneath those words, a final line that made Elara's blood run cold. "The healers of Ashford Valley carry the old blood, the blood of those who ruled before the wolves, the blood that could produce such a child." She looked at the mark on her wrist, at the bond that connected her to the most powerful wolf in the kingdom, at the impossible truth that was beginning to take shape in her mind. She was not just a healer who had been summoned to save a dying king. She was the child in the prophecy, or perhaps the mother of one yet to be born. The documents fell from her trembling hands as the weight of that revelation settled onto her shoulders. Outside, the moon continued its slow arc across the sky, indifferent to the destinies being forged beneath its light. And somewhere in the depths of the palace, the Alpha King's heart beat in perfect rhythm with her own, both of them trapped in a dance that had begun long before either was born. The whispers began before dawn. They slithered through the palace corridors like serpents made of sound, coiling around corners and seeping beneath doors. By the time the sun crested the eastern mountains, every servant in Valdris knew that something impossible had happened in the old wing, something that threatened to upend 1,000 years of tradition. The human healer had bonded with the king. Elara heard the whispers even in her small guest chamber, where she had spent the remaining hours of night studying the documents Commander Theron had brought her. She heard them in the hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when she passed. She heard them in the sidelong glances of servants who had been polite the day before and now looked at her as though she carried plague. Witch, they called her, enchantress, corrupter of the throne. She ignored them all. There was work to be done, and Elara Ashford had never been one to let words interfere with action. She returned to the king's chambers at first light, carrying her satchel of medicines and her mind full of questions. The documents had given her answers, but those answers had only spawned more mysteries. If Kael had opposed the destruction of Ashford Valley, why had it still burned? If his brother had gone against direct orders, why had there been no consequences? And why, after 5 years, had the king chosen to reveal these secrets now? The answers, she suspected, lay not in papers, but in the man himself. She found him standing by the window, silhouetted against the gray morning light. He had changed from the torn shirt of the previous night into a simple tunic of black wool, though she could see the bulge of bandages beneath the fabric. His posture was rigid, the posture of a soldier awaiting battle rather than a patient awaiting treatment. "You did not sleep," she said. It was not a question. Through the bond, she had felt his restlessness throughout the night. Every time she had started to drift toward slumber, a surge of his pain or anxiety had pulled her back to wakefulness. "Neither did you." He turned to face her, and she saw the shadows beneath his eyes, the pallor of his skin. "The moonfire is accelerating. I can feel it reaching deeper." Elara set down her satchel and approached him with the clinical detachment she had cultivated over years of treating the wounded. She pulled aside his tunic to examine the wound, and what she saw made her breath catch. The black veins had spread overnight. They now extended past his shoulder, creeping across his chest like the branches of a dead tree. The edges of the original wound had begun to crack and weep, a substance that was not quite blood, something darker and thicker that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "This is faster than it should be," she murmured. "The bond," the king said quietly. "It feeds on connection, on emotion. Last night, when the bond formed between us, it gave the moonfire something new to consume. The implications hit her like a physical blow. The very thing that bound them together was accelerating his death, and by extension, her own. "Then we must work faster," she said, pushing aside her fear. "Sit. I need to try something." The treatment she attempted that morning was more aggressive than anything she had tried before. She combined herbs that she would normally never mix, creating compounds that burned going down and left the king gasping for breath. She applied poultices that sizzled against his infected flesh, filling the room with the acrid smell of purification. She pushed her own healing energy through the bond. feeling it flow from her hands into his corrupted tissue like water poured onto burning sand. For 3 hours, she fought the moonfire with everything she had, and for 3 hours, the moonfire fought back. By mid-morning, she was forced to admit what she had feared from the beginning. The poison was too deeply rooted, too thoroughly woven into his essence. She could slow it, perhaps, but she could not stop it, and every day that passed would make it stronger. She sat back on her heels, exhausted, her hands trembling from the effort she had expended. "It is not enough," she said. "Nothing I do will be enough." The king looked at her with an expression she could not read. "You sound surprised. I told you there was no cure. I did not come here to fail. Then perhaps you came here for the wrong reasons." Before she could respond, the door to the chamber burst open. Commander Theron strode in, his face set in hard lines that spoke of trouble. "The council has been summoned," he said without preamble. "Lord Kaelin has called an emergency session to discuss what he calls the corruption of the throne." The king's expression did not change, but Elara felt a surge of cold anger through the bond. He anticipated this. "He has been preparing for this," Theron confirmed. "There are already nobles arriving from the outer territories. He has turned what should be a private matter into a public spectacle." "What does he want?" Elara asked. The commander turned to look at her, and there was something in his gray eyes that might have been sympathy. "He wants you dead, healer, and he wants the king declared unfit to rule." The Moon Council convened at noon in the great hall of Valdris, a chamber so vast that it could hold 1,000 wolves and still have room for their shadows. The ceiling soared upward into darkness, supported by pillars carved from the bones of creatures that had gone extinct before humans learned to write. The floor was polished obsidian, black as a starless night, reflecting the torchlight like a frozen lake of fire. 12 thrones ringed the central dais, each one carved from a different stone and bearing the crest of one of the great wolf houses. These were the seats of the Lords of the Moon, the nobles whose bloodline stretched back to the founding of Valdris. They held no formal power over the king, but their influence shaped every decision made within the realm. And at their center, on a throne of iron and ice, sat Lord Kaelin Ironvein. Elara had never seen the king's brother before, but she recognized him instantly. He had the same dark hair as Kael, the same strong bones, the same air of barely contained power. But where Kael's eyes burned gold with alpha essence, Kaelin's were the pale amber of a wolf denied its birthright. And where Kael's face showed the weariness of a man fighting an impossible battle, Kaelin's showed only cold calculation. He was handsome in the way that a blade is handsome, elegant and deadly and utterly without warmth. Elara stood at the edge of the hall, flanked by guards who had made clear through their posture that she was not a guest, but a prisoner. She had been brought here directly from the king's chambers, given no time to prepare, no opportunity to strategize. That, she suspected, was exactly what Kaelin had intended. The king entered from the opposite side of the hall, walking with the careful deliberation of a man conserving his strength. Commander Theron walked beside him, one hand resting on his sword hilt, his eyes scanning the assembled nobles for threats. They took their places on the royal dais, Kael settling into the throne that dominated the far end of the hall. Through the bond, Elara felt his pain as he sat. The moon fire was burning hotter today, aggravated by stress and movement. Every breath he took was an act of will. "Lords of the Moon," Kaelin began, his voice carrying effortlessly through the vast space. "I have called this council to address a matter of grave concern, a threat to our kingdom, our traditions, and our very way of life." He gestured toward Elara, and every eye in the hall turned to follow his hand. "This woman, this human, has done what no human has ever done in 1,000 years of history. She has formed a mate bond with our king." Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. Some looked at her with curiosity, others with disgust, still others with something that might have been fear. "The mate bond is sacred," Kaelin continued. "It is the means by which the alpha power ensures its continuation. It connects the king to a partner worthy of standing beside him, a partner who will produce heirs capable of carrying the burden of rule." He paused, letting his words sink in. But this bond is not sacred. It is corruption. It is witchcraft, a human woman using forbidden arts to ensnare our king and poison our bloodline. The murmurs grew louder. Elara saw hands moving toward weapons, saw lips curling in snarls that revealed 2 sharp teeth. "I demand," Kaelin declared, "that this woman be put to trial for sorcery, and I demand that the king be examined by our healers to determine if his judgment has been compromised by her influence." Silence fell over the hall. Every eye turned to the royal dais, waiting for the king's response. Through the bond, Elara felt Kael gathering his strength. She felt his anger, burning hot beneath his exhaustion. She felt his fear, not for himself but for her, for what his brother's words might unleash. And she felt something else, a fierce determination that refused to bend. "You speak of tradition, brother," the king said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "You speak of sacred bonds and worthy partners. But you forget one thing." He rose from his throne, every movement costing him, and descended the steps of the dais. The nobles parted before him, their earlier hostility fading in the face of his presence. Even diminished, even dying, he was still the Alpha, still the king. "The bond chose her," he continued, stopping before his brother's throne. "Not I, not she. The bond itself, the same power that flows through my veins and through the veins of every king before me. Are you saying the bond is wrong? Are you saying the power that made our dynasty is corrupt?" Kaelin's eyes narrowed. "I am saying that bonds can be forced, that magic can be twisted, that a human witch, desperate to survive in a world she no longer controls, might do anything to preserve her own life. Then prove it." The challenge hung in the air, electric and dangerous. "Call your healers," Kael said. "Have them examine me. Have them probe my mind and test my will. If they find any trace of sorcery, any evidence of magical manipulation, I will submit to your judgment." He turned to face the assembled lords, spreading his arms wide. "But if they find nothing, if they confirm that this bond is natural and true, then you will accept it, all of you. And any who speak against my queen will answer to me." The word landed like a thunderbolt. Queen. He had not called her that before, had not even implied that she might hold such a title. But now, in front of the entire council, he had claimed her as his equal. Elara felt her heart stutter. Through the bond, she felt his resolve, solid as stone. This was not a political maneuver. This was a declaration of war. Kaelin studied his brother for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled. "Very well," he said. "Let the healers examine you. Let them confirm what we all know to be true. But while they work, the woman remains in custody, for everyone's protection." "Agreed?" Kael said. He turned to look at Elara, and in his eyes she saw a message meant for her alone. "Trust me." She gave the slightest nod. Guards stepped forward to take her arms, and she allowed herself to be led away. As she passed through the great doors of the hall, she heard the murmurs starting again, louder now, more confused. The nobles did not know what to make of what had just happened. Neither, if she was honest, did she. They took her to a tower room high above the main palace, with narrow windows that offered a view of the mountains and a door reinforced with iron. It was a prison, though a comfortable one. There was a bed with clean linens, a table with books and candles, a small fireplace that crackled with warmth. She was not chained, she was not abused, but she was also not free. The hours passed slowly. Through the bond, she could feel Kael undergoing the examination, feel the probing magic of Wolf Healer searching his mind for traces of sorcery. She felt his discomfort, his frustration, his grim satisfaction when they found nothing. But she also felt the moonfire, burning ever stronger, feeding on his stress and anger. Every minute that passed brought him closer to death. And there was nothing she could do about it from this tower. When darkness fell, the door to her cell opened. She expected guards, perhaps, or a messenger with news of the council's decision. Instead, Commander Theron stepped inside, alone. "The examination is complete," he said. "They found no evidence of sorcery. The bond is natural." Elara released a breath she had not realized she was holding. And the council? Divided. Theron moved to the window, his face catching the moonlight. Some accept the king's word, others follow Kaelin. The nobles from the outer territories are confused. They came expecting a simple political drama, and instead they find themselves choosing sides in a conflict they do not understand. What happens now? Now, the commander said, turning to face her, you need to understand what you have become involved in. Not just the politics, not just the bond. All of it. He settled into the chair across from her, his movements carrying the weight of decades. I have served beside Kael for 35 years, he began. I was with him when the Alpha power first manifested. I was with him through the wars that followed. I have seen him make decisions that haunt him still, and I have seen him bear burdens that would break lesser men. He paused, gathering his thoughts. What I have never seen, until you, is anyone who could make him admit he needs help. Elara frowned. He summoned me here. He asked for my assistance. He summoned a healer, Theron corrected. He asked for medical treatment. That is not the same thing. Kael has always believed that the burden of leadership must be borne alone, that asking for help is a sign of weakness, that letting anyone see his pain puts them in danger. The commander leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. But the bond changes that. Through it, you see everything. His doubts, his fears, his guilt. He cannot hide from you, and that terrifies him more than the moonfire ever could. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to understand what you are fighting for. Theron stood, moving back to the window. It is not just his life at stake. It is not even just your life. If Kael dies, the Alpha power will pass to the next eligible heir. Kaelin. Kaelin, the commander confirmed. A man who believes that humans are a disease to be eradicated. A man who has spent his entire life preparing to take the throne by any means necessary. A man who tried to steal his brother's essence through forbidden ritual, and when that failed, poisoned him with moonfire. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. You are saying, Elara said slowly, that this is not just about survival. It is about what kind of kingdom Valdris will become. I am saying that you are the only one who can save him. Theron turned to face her, and she saw in his expression something she had not expected. Hope. Not because of your healing skills, though those are formidable, but because of what you represent. What do I represent? A bridge, the commander said, between what we are and what we could be. Humans and wolves have been enemies for so long that we have forgotten it was ever different. But there was a time, before the wars, before the hatred, when we lived side by side, when the healers of your bloodline ruled with wisdom rather than force. Elara thought of the documents she had read, of the prophecy that spoke of a child born with the blood of 2 thrones. You know about my bloodline, she said, about the old blood. I know what the king knows, and I know that Kaelin has spent 20 years trying to hunt down every trace of it. Theron moved toward the door. He fears what you represent even more than what you might do. That is why he will never stop coming for you. Not until one of you is destroyed. And if I cannot save the king? The commander paused at the threshold. Then pray that death takes you quickly, he said. Because what Kaelin will do to you if you survive will make Moonfire seem merciful. He left, and Elara sat alone in the darkness, feeling the distant pulse of a heartbeat that was slowly failing. 3 days passed before they released her from the tower. 3 days of watching the mountains change color with the light. 3 days of feeling the king's strength ebb and flow through the bond. 3 days of planning, strategizing, preparing for whatever came next. When the guards finally came to escort her down, she was ready. The council had reached a decision, they told her. The bond was accepted as legitimate. She was to be treated as the king's chosen partner, with all the privileges and protections that entailed. But there was a condition. She was to participate in the moon hunt. The moon hunt was an ancient tradition, a test of courage and worth that all prospective queens had undergone since the founding of Valdris. It took place in the deep forest beyond the palace, on the night of the full moon. The queen must enter alone, survive until dawn, and return with proof of her valor. Many had died, more had been scarred, all had been changed. Elara accepted the challenge without hesitation. She understood what it truly was. Not a test, but a trap. A chance for Kaelin's allies to eliminate her in a place where there would be no witnesses. But she also understood something else. Something she had learned in 4 years of treating wounded soldiers in the chaos of war. Sometimes the only way to defeat a trap was to spring it on your own terms. The night of the moon hunt arrived with clouds that veiled the stars, and a wind that carried the scent of rain. Elara stood at the edge of the royal forest, dressed in the traditional hunting leathers that had been provided for her. A short knife hung at her belt, the only weapon she was permitted. The king had come to see her off, despite his advisor's objections. He stood beside Commander Theron, his face pale but determined, his golden eyes burning with an intensity that seemed to ward off the shadows. "You do not have to do this," he said quietly. "There are other ways. I can order the hunt postponed, find legal means to circumvent the tradition." "And prove Kaelin right?" Elara shook her head. "Prove that I am too weak to stand beside you? No. This ends tonight. The forest will not be empty." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "My brother has been meeting with lords from the northern territories. They brought soldiers with them, elite hunters who know these woods. I know. You could die." She looked into his eyes and saw the fear he was trying to hide. Not fear for himself, though the moonfire was eating him alive. Fear for her. "I could have died 100 times during the war," she said. "In field hospitals with no supplies, surrounded by enemies, working through bombardments that shook the earth. I learned something in those years, Your Majesty. Death does not care about fairness. It comes when it comes. The only thing we control is what we do before it arrives." She placed her hand over his heart, feeling the moonfire pulse beneath his skin. "I did not survive everything I have survived just to die in a forest," she continued, "and neither did you." The king covered her hand with his own. Through the bond, she felt something shift between them, something that went beyond alliance or necessity or even survival. "Come back," he said. "That is an order." She smiled, the first real smile she had allowed herself in days. "I do not take orders from wolves," she replied, "but I might consider a request. Then I am requesting." He released her hand and stepped back, assuming the formal posture of a king addressing his subject. "Return to me, Elara of Ashford Valley. Return, and we will face what comes together." She bowed, not deeply, not submissively, but with the respect of one equal to another. "Then together we shall face it." She turned and walked into the forest, leaving the torchlight behind. The darkness swallowed her within minutes. The forest at night was a different world from the one that existed by day. The trees that had seemed ordinary under sunlight now loomed like ancient sentinels, their branches reaching toward her like grasping fingers. The undergrowth rustled with unseen movement, and every shadow seemed to breathe with hidden menace. Elara moved carefully, using skills she had learned in childhood and refined during the war. She made no unnecessary sound. She left no obvious trail. She used the wind to mask her scent and the darkness to cloak her movements. But she was not foolish enough to think she was truly hidden. Through the bond, she could feel the king growing more distant, his presence fading as she moved deeper into the forest. At the same time, she became aware of other presences, not through the bond, but through the instincts that had kept her alive through 4 years of battlefield chaos. She was being hunted. She had expected this. What she had not expected was the scale of it. They came from all directions, moving with a coordination that spoke of military training. She caught glimpses of them between the trees. Tall figures in dark armor, their eyes gleaming with the pale fire of wolf blood. They made no attempt to hide their presence. They wanted her to know she was surrounded. They wanted her to be afraid. Elara stopped in a small clearing, her back against an ancient oak. She drew her knife, though she knew it would be useless against so many. Around her, the hunters emerged from the shadows, forming a ring of steel and flesh that left no avenue of escape. One of them stepped forward. He was larger than the others, his armor marked with symbols of rank. When he spoke, his voice carried the cold authority of command. "The human witch," he said. "Lord Kalen sends his regards. I am sure he does." Elara kept her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "Did he also send instructions, or are you permitted to think for yourselves?" The commander smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp for any human mouth. "We are to bring him proof of your death." He drew his sword, the blade gleaming in the faint moonlight. "How we obtain that proof is left to our discretion." The hunters began to close in, their movements synchronized, their weapons ready. Elara felt something stir within her, something old and powerful, awakened by the bond and the stress and the desperate need for survival. It rose from the depths of her being like fire rising from embers, filling her veins with heat that had nothing to do with fear. She remembered the visions she had seen through the bond, the flash of power when her hands had touched the king's wound, the way the light had flared between them, gold and silver intertwined. She remembered the documents she had read, the bloodline of those who ruled before the wolves, the healers whose power was so great they could mend the earth itself. And she understood, in that moment, what she truly was. The commander lunged, his sword sweeping toward her neck. Elara raised her hand. Light exploded from her palm, not the gentle gold of healing, but a fierce, blinding silver that seared the air itself. The commander was thrown backward, his armor crumpling as though struck by a giant's fist. The other hunters stumbled, crying out as the radiance burned their night-adapted eyes. Elara did not understand what she was doing. She only knew that the power was there, flowing through her like a river that had finally found its course. She pushed, and the energy pushed with her. She willed the hunters to fall, and they fell. She demanded protection, and the very air around her hardened into a shield that turned aside their desperate strikes. In 30 seconds, it was over. The clearing was silent, except for the groans of wounded men. None were dead. Elara had instinctively held back, channeling her power to incapacitate rather than kill. But they would not be fighting again tonight, and perhaps not for many nights to come. She stood in the center of the destruction, her hand still raised, her body trembling with the aftermath of power she did not understand. The silver light faded slowly, leaving her in darkness once more. Then she heard the sound of slow, deliberate applause. Kalen emerged from the shadows between two massive oaks. He was alone, unarmed, wearing not armor, but the simple clothes of a nobleman at leisure. He stepped over the bodies of his fallen soldiers with the casual indifference of a man walking through a garden. "Impressive," he said. "I had heard rumors of what you might be, but I confess I did not believe them." Elara kept her hand raised, ready to call the power again. "Stay back." "Or what?" He continued to approach, stopping just outside arm's reach. "You will blast me as you blasted them?" "You could try, but I suspect you have exhausted yourself with that display. The old blood is potent, but it demands payment for its use." He was right. She could feel it now, the hollowness that had replaced the fire in her veins. She was drained, emptied, barely able to stand. "What do you want?" she demanded. "I want to talk." Kalen spread his hands, showing his empty palms. "Simply talk. Is that so difficult to believe? You sent soldiers to kill me. I sent soldiers to test you. There is a difference." He began to circle her slowly, like a predator assessing prey. "I needed to know if the rumors were true, if you truly carried the old blood. And now I do. What difference does it make? All the difference in the world." He stopped, facing her directly. "You see, my brother believes that peace between humans and wolves is possible. He believes that the old hatreds can be set aside, that we can build something new together. He is a fool, but he is a sincere fool, and that makes him dangerous." He stepped closer, his pale amber eyes boring into hers. "But you," he continued, "you are something different. You are proof that the old blood still exists, that the power that once ruled this land could rise again, and that changes everything. You are afraid of me." The words came out before Elara could stop them, but she knew they were true. She could see it in the tightness around his eyes, the slight tension in his shoulders. "I am cautious," Kalen corrected. "There is a difference. The old blood nearly destroyed my family once. I will not allow it to do so again." "Your family? What are you talking about?" He smiled, and there was something almost tragic in the expression. "Has my brother not told you? Our mother was human, a healer, like yourself. She came to the palace as a servant, caught our father's eye, became his queen. She was beautiful, gentle, kind. Everyone loved her." His voice hardened. "And she murdered our father in his bed." Elara stared at him, shock momentarily replacing her exhaustion. "That is not possible," she said. "The king, he showed me documents. He said your mother was accused of treachery, but he never mentioned, because he does not know the truth." Kaelin's face twisted. "He was 15 when it happened. He worshipped our mother, believed she could do no wrong. When they found our father dead, with poison on his lips and her hands still wrapped around the cup, Kael refused to accept it. He convinced himself that someone else must have been responsible, that our mother was framed. And you?" "I was older. I saw things he did not see, the ambition beneath the sweetness, the calculation behind every smile. She married our father for power, and when she realized she would never truly have it, she decided to take it for herself." He turned away, looking up at the moon that had finally emerged from behind the clouds. "The old blood is a curse," he said quietly. "It corrupts everything it touches. Our mother was its vessel, and it turned her into a murderer. Now you carry it, bonded to my brother, and I see the same pattern repeating." He looked back at her, and for a moment she saw not a villain, but a man haunted by ghosts. "I do not hate you, Elara Ashford. I do not even blame you for what you are, but I cannot allow history to repeat itself. I cannot watch another member of my family die because of the old blood, so you will kill me instead, if I must. Or we could find another way." He extended his hand toward her. "Leave," he said, "tonight. I will provide you with horses, gold, documents that will see you safely to the southern islands. You can build a new life there, far from wolves and politics and ancient prophecies. You can live in peace, and the bond, it will fade with distance." He spoke with the confidence of someone who had researched the subject thoroughly. "The further you go, the weaker it becomes. Within a year, perhaps 2, you will barely feel it at all. My brother will survive its breaking. He is strong enough for that." Elara looked at the offered hand. Part of her, the part that was exhausted and frightened and desperately wanted to live, considered accepting. It would be easy. It would be safe. It would be the sensible choice. But she had stopped making sensible choices a long time ago. "And what of the moonfire?" she asked. "Your poison is killing him. Even if I leave, he will still die." Something flickered in Kaelin's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. The moonfire was a mistake, he admitted. An unintended consequence of a ritual that should have worked. "I did not mean to kill him, only to take what should have been mine. But you did. And now he is dying because of what you did." "Yes, and that is a tragedy. But tragedies happen, especially to kings." He lowered his hand, seeing that she would not take it. "When he is gone, I will rule as he should have ruled. I will protect our people from the humans who would destroy us. I will ensure that what happened to our father never happens again, by eliminating all humans, by genocide, by doing what is necessary." His voice hardened. "I am not a monster healer. I am a realist. Humans and wolves cannot coexist. History has proven that again and again. One or the other must prevail, and you have chosen which one. I have chosen my people, as anyone would." Elara straightened, pushing through her exhaustion to stand tall. "Then we have nothing more to discuss," she said. "I will not leave. I will not abandon the king to your poison or your politics, and I will not let you destroy everything he is trying to build." Kaelin studied her for a long moment. "You will die," he said finally. "Perhaps not tonight, perhaps not by my hand, but you will die. The old blood always consumes its vessels in the end." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but until then, I will fight. For him, for myself, for the possibility that you might be wrong about what humans and wolves can become together." She took a step toward him, and though she was drained and weaponless and facing a man who could have killed her with a thought, she did not flinch. "You fear the old blood because you saw what it did to your mother. But has it occurred to you that she was not destroyed by the power itself, but by the isolation that came with it? That she might have become something different if anyone had tried to understand her instead of using her? Kaelin said nothing. "Your brother is not your father," Elara continued, "and I am not your mother. The past does not have to repeat itself unless we choose to let it." She walked past him, heading back toward the palace. He could have stopped her, could have killed her with a single blow while she was too weak to defend herself, but he let her go. Perhaps because he had no more soldiers to send against her, or perhaps because, somewhere deep inside, a small part of him wanted to believe she might be right. She emerged from the forest at dawn. The king was waiting for her at the edge of the trees, alone despite his advisor's objections. His face was pale with more than illness, and when she stepped into the clearing, she saw his shoulders sag with relief. "You are alive," he said. "I told you I would be." She walked toward him, and he met her halfway. For a long moment, they simply stood together, two people who had been through too much to need words. Then she told him everything. About the hunters, about the power that had risen within her, about her conversation with Kaelin. She left nothing out, including the revelations about their mother. When she finished, his face was carved from stone. "He told you our mother was a murderer," he said. "He believes it. Whether it is true, I do not know. It is not true." The king's voice was flat, but she felt the turmoil beneath it through the bond. "Our mother was kind and gentle and incapable of harming anyone. She was framed by someone at court. I have spent 20 years trying to prove it. And your brother? My brother saw what he wanted to see, what made sense to his view of the world." He shook his head. "Kaelin has always believed that humans are inferior, are dangerous, are to be controlled at best and eliminated at worst. The idea that our mother was a victim would contradict everything he has built his life upon." Elara was silent for a moment. "What if you are both wrong?" she said finally. "What if the truth is more complicated than either of you wants to believe?" The king looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Kaelin is not simply a villain," she said. "He is afraid. He watched his father die and his brother take the throne that should have been his. He spent his whole life feeling powerless, and now he will do anything to never feel that way again." She took his hands in hers. "That does not excuse what he has done. It does not justify the moonfire or the attempts on my life. But it means that perhaps there is another way to end this conflict. Not through war, but through understanding. You want me to forgive him? I want you to survive." She squeezed his hands. "The moonfire is accelerating. I can feel it through the bond. We have weeks at most, perhaps only days. Destroying your brother will not save you. Only I can do that." The king was silent for a long time. "Then we had better return to the palace," he said at last. "We have work to do." They walked back together, hand in hand, as the sun rose over the mountains and the wolves of Valdris began to stir. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Elara threw herself into her research with a desperation born of necessity. She consulted every text in the royal library. She questioned every healer who would speak to her. She experimented with combinations of herbs and magic that had never been tried before. And slowly, impossibly, she began to find something. The moonfire was not simply a poison. It was a corruption of the bond that held body and spirit together, a parasite that fed on the connection between the king and his alpha power. The healers who had died before her had tried to fight it directly, and it had consumed them for their trouble. But Elara was bonded to the king in a way none of them had been. She could feel the moonfire through that connection, could sense the patterns of its hunger. And in those patterns, she began to see a weakness. The poison fed on imbalance, on the king bearing his burden alone, on power without partnership, strength without support. But the bond between them created balance. Her presence, her connection, her willingness to share his pain. It did not destroy the moonfire, but it disrupted it, confused it, slowed its advance, and if the bond could slow it, perhaps a deeper bond could stop it altogether. The realization came to her in the dead of night, 3 weeks after the moon hunt. She stood in the king's chambers, watching him sleep fitfully as the moonfire burned through his veins. The black lines had reached his heart now. She could see them pulsing beneath his skin, a darkness that seemed to swallow the firelight. He was dying. They both knew it, but there was a way. The next morning, she called Commander Theron to her room and told him what she had discovered. "The bond allows me to share his burden," she explained. "That is why the moonfire has slowed, but sharing is not enough. Not. To truly stop it, I would need to take his burden entirely, to absorb not just his pain but his wounds, his sins, his guilt, everything that feeds the poison." Theron's face was grim. "That would kill you," he said. "Perhaps. Or perhaps the old blood within me is strong enough to survive." She met his eyes. "But even if it kills me, it might save him. And that is a trade I am willing to make. He would never allow it. He does not get to choose for me." She stood, moving to the window where she could see the mountains in the distance. "I have spent my whole life healing others, saving lives that everyone else had given up on. This is no different. It is entirely different." Theron stood as well, his voice roughened by emotion. "Those were strangers. This is the man I am bonded to, the man whose heart beats in rhythm with my own." She turned to face him. "If I do not try, we both die anyway. At least this way, one of us might survive." The commander was silent for a long time. "What do you need from me?" he asked finally. "Your support when I stand before the council." She reached out and gripped his arm. "And your promise that if this works, you will help him rebuild. Not as the warrior you have always been, but as the advisor he will need." Theron looked at her, and she saw something shift in his gray eyes. Respect, perhaps, or acceptance. "You have my word," he said. They gathered the council 2 days later. Elara stood before the Lords of the Moon, no longer a prisoner or a curiosity, but a queen in all but name. The king sat on his throne behind her, too weak now to stand for long, but his eyes burned with the same fierce determination she felt through the bond. Kaelin was there as well, seated in his throne of ice, watching with an expression she could not read. "I believe there may be a way to break the moonfire curse," Elara announced. The murmurs that followed were immediate and skeptical. "Impossible," one lord declared. "There is no cure for moonfire. Every healer in history has confirmed this. Every healer in history did not carry the old blood," Elara replied, "and none of them were bonded to the king in the way that I am." She paused, letting her words settle over the assembly. "The moonfire is not simply a poison. It is a curse born from imbalance, from hatred, from a wound that was never healed. My bond with the king has already slowed its advance. Every day that our connection strengthens, the curse weakens further. This is not theory. This is observable fact." She turned to face the king, seeing the question in his golden eyes. "But slowing is not stopping," she continued. "To truly break the curse, I need knowledge that does not exist in any library or archive in Valdris. I need to find the one person who understands the old blood and its power." "The Pale Seer," Commander Theron said quietly. "The last of the ancient healers." The murmurs grew louder. The Pale Seer was legend, a figure spoken of in whispers and half-remembered stories. Some said she had died centuries ago. Others claimed she had never existed at all. "She is real," Elara said firmly, "and she lives in the exile lands beyond the northern border. If anyone knows how to break a curse woven from the old blood, it is her." Lord Kaelin leaned forward in his throne of ice, his amber eyes sharp with calculation. "You propose to leave the king's side," he said, "to travel hundreds of miles into territory where no law protects you. And you expect us to believe this is not simply an escape? If I wanted to escape, I would have done so before the bond was formed." Elara met his gaze without flinching. "The bond ties my life to the king's. If he dies, I die. Running would accomplish nothing except delaying my own death." She turned back to the assembly. "I am not asking for your permission," she said. "I am informing you of my intention. The journey will take approximately 14 days. During that time, the bond will continue to slow the moonfire's advance. When I return, I will have the knowledge needed to break the curse entirely." "And if you do not return?" Kaelin pressed. "Then you will have your wish, Lord Kaelin. Both your brother and I will be dead, and the throne will pass to whoever the power deems worthy." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. From his place on the royal dais, Kael finally spoke. "How certain are you that this seer can help?" Elara turned to face him, and through the bond she let him feel her conviction, her determination, her refusal to accept defeat. "I am certain that she is our only chance," she said. "The moonfire has reached your heart. We have weeks at most before it completes its work. I can slow it, but I cannot stop it, not without understanding the curse's true nature." The king studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Then go," he said. "Find this seer. Learn what you need to learn. And come back to me." The command carried the weight of something more than royal authority. Through the bond, Elara felt what he could not say aloud. Fear, hope, and something deeper that neither of them had yet named. "I will return," she promised. "That is not a hope. It is a fact." She bowed, not deeply, not submissively, but with the respect of one equal to another. 14 days, Your Majesty. Keep fighting until then." She turned and walked from the chamber, feeling every eye upon her back. The whispers followed her through the corridors, speculation and doubt and grudging admiration mixing together like currents in a river. But she did not look back. There was work to be done, and Elara Ashford had never been one to let words interfere with action. Commander Theron found her in the stables an hour later, already preparing her horse for the journey. "You cannot go alone," he said. "I can, and I will. The exile lands are dangerous enough without drawing attention with a military escort. I am not offering a military escort." Theron moved to stand beside her, his gray eyes steady. "I am offering myself. One companion, one sword, one person who knows the Northern Territories and can guide you through them. Your place is beside the king. My place is wherever I can best serve him." Theron began saddling his own horse with the practiced efficiency of a career soldier. "If you die in those frozen wastes, he dies too, which means protecting you is protecting him. The logic is simple." Elara studied him for a moment. "You have served him for 35 years, she said. "You have watched over him since he was a boy. And now you would leave his side for a woman you barely know. I would leave his side for a woman who has already done more for him than anyone in those 35 years. Theron finished with his saddle and turned to face her. He carries less weight now. "Did you notice? The way he stands, the way he speaks. The bond has given him something he never had before." "What is that?" "Someone who sees him as a man instead of a king." Theron's voice softened. "He needs that more than he needs my sword at his side." Elara was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded. "We leave at dawn," she said. "Pack for 2 weeks of hard travel. I am already packed." She almost smiled. "Of course you are." They departed as the sun rose over the mountains, 2 riders heading north into the frozen unknown. Behind them, the palace of Valdris grew smaller with each passing mile, until it was nothing more than a dark shape against the brightening sky. And in his chambers, the Alpha King pressed his hand against his heart, feeling the bond stretch thin but hold strong, a golden thread connecting him to the woman who rode to save his life. "Hold on," he whispered to the empty room. "Hold on until she returns." The moonfire pulsed in answer, hungry and patient, counting the days. The road to the Northern Territories was a wound carved through frozen earth. Elara rode through landscapes that seemed to belong to a different world than the one she had left behind. The forests gave way to tundra, the tundra to ice fields that stretched toward a horizon where sky and ground became indistinguishable. The air grew thin and sharp, each breath cutting at her lungs like shards of glass. She was not alone. Commander Theron rode beside her, his weathered face set against the wind, his gray eyes constantly scanning the terrain for threats. He had refused to let her make this journey without protection, and when she had argued that his place was beside the king, he had simply shaken his head. "Kael has his guards," he had said, "his advisors, his physicians. What he does not have is anyone who can bring you back alive, and if you die out there, he dies too. So I am coming." She had not argued further. The truth was, She was grateful for his presence. The bond with Kael grew weaker with every mile she traveled, fading from a constant warmth to a distant flicker. Without Theron's steady companionship, she might have lost herself in the emptiness of the frozen wastes. The bond saved them both during those long days of travel. Each morning, Elara woke to feel Kael's heartbeat pulsing faintly through their connection. Each night she fell asleep with the knowledge that he still lived. The moonfire continued its slow advance. She could sense that much, but the curse seemed confused by the strengthening bond between them. It had been designed to feed on isolation, on a king bearing his burdens alone. Instead, it found itself facing something it had never encountered before: partnership. The curse could not process what it could not understand, and so it slowed, buying them precious time that should not have existed. Commander Theron noticed the change on the third day. "You are stronger than you were yesterday," he observed as they made camp in the shelter of a frozen cliff. "The scars on your arms are dimmer." Elara looked down at her hands, at the faint silver lines that traced patterns across her skin. He was right. The marks left by the bond's formation had begun to fade, not disappearing entirely, but settling into something that looked almost natural. "The bond is stabilizing," she said. "When it first formed, it was raw, uncontrolled. Now it is finding its balance. And that helps the king? It helps us both." She stared into the small fire they had built, watching the flames dance against the darkness. The moonfire was designed to exploit weakness. The bond creates strength. As long as our connection holds, the curse cannot claim him completely. But you said you cannot stop it, only slow it. Which is why we keep riding. Elara rose, moving to check on the horses. "Every day we delay is a day the curse gains ground. I can feel it pushing against the bond, testing for weaknesses. If I am not back within 2 weeks—" She did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Theron nodded, understanding perfectly. "Then we do not delay," he said. "We ride at first light." They had been riding for 5 days when they reached the border of the exile lands. There was no marker, no fence, no sign to indicate where civilization ended and the realm of the forgotten began. But Elara felt it nonetheless, a change in the air, a weight that pressed against her skin like invisible hands. The very earth beneath them seemed to reject their presence, as though warning them that they did not belong. "Beyond this point," Theron said quietly, "even the king's authority means nothing. The exiles answer to no law but their own. Then we had better hope they are feeling hospitable." They pressed forward. The exile lands were a graveyard of ambition. Scattered across the frozen plains were the remnants of those who had fled or been cast out from Valdris over the centuries. Ruined towers jutted from the ice like broken teeth, abandoned villages huddled in valleys where the wind could not reach. Occasionally, Elara spotted movement in the distance, figures watching from hilltops or ridgelines, but none approached. They were being observed, evaluated, judged. On the 7th day, they found the cave. It was not marked on any map, not mentioned in any text. But Elara knew it the moment she saw it. A dark opening in the face of a glacier, surrounded by ice formations that seemed almost deliberate in their arrangement. The entrance was small, barely large enough for a horse to pass through, but beyond it, she could sense something vast and ancient. The Pale Seer lived here. She was certain of it. Theron dismounted, his hand moving to his sword. "Let me go first," he said. "No." Elara swung down from her own horse, her legs stiff from days of riding. "This is my quest. Whatever waits inside, I must face it myself, and if it kills you, then you return to Valdris and tell the king that I tried." The commander stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he released his sword and stepped back. "You have more courage than most soldiers I have served with," he said quietly. "I hope it is enough." Elara turned toward the cave entrance. The darkness within seemed to pulse, as though breathing. She could feel something watching her from those depths, something old and powerful and utterly alien. She walked forward anyway. The tunnel was longer than it appeared from outside. It twisted and turned, sometimes narrowing until she had to squeeze through gaps in the ice, sometimes opening into chambers vast enough to hold armies. Strange lights flickered in the walls, phosphorescent glows that cast the world in shades of blue and green. And always, the sense of being watched grew stronger. She emerged finally into a cavern that took her breath away. The ceiling soared upward into darkness, supported by pillars of ice that seemed to have grown naturally from the floor. At the center of the chamber, a pool of water lay perfectly still, its surface reflecting nothing despite the lights that danced around it. And beside the pool, seated on a throne carved from a single block of crystal, was the woman she had come to find. The pale seer was ancient beyond measure. Her hair was white as fresh snow, falling in waves to the floor around her. Her skin was translucent, veins visible beneath like rivers on a map. Her eyes were the most striking feature, pale as milk, seemingly blind, yet seeing everything at once. She wore robes of gray that seemed to shift and flow even without wind, and around her neck hung a pendant that pulsed with a light that matched the rhythm of Elara's own heartbeat. "I have been waiting for you," the seer said. Her voice was soft, barely louder than a whisper, yet it filled the chamber completely. The child of two bloods, the bridge between worlds, the one who would either end the Alpha line or save it. "You know why I am here," Elara said. "I know everything about you, Elara Ashford." The seer rose from her throne, moving with a grace that belied her apparent age. "I knew of you before you were born. I watched you grow in your mother's womb. I witnessed your first breath, and I will witness your last." She stopped before Elara, close enough to touch. "The question is not whether I know why you are here. The question is whether you are prepared to pay the price for what you seek. I am prepared to do whatever is necessary to save the king, even if it destroys you?" Elara met those pale eyes without flinching. Even then, the seer studied her for a long moment. Then slowly she smiled. Good, because anything less would not be enough. She turned and moved toward the pool, gesturing for Elara to follow. "The moonfire is not simply a poison," she began. "It is a curse, a corruption woven from hatred and betrayal, created by the last of my kind before she died. Your kind? The healers of the old blood." The seer trailed her fingers through the water, and images began to form on its surface. "We were the first rulers of this land, long before the wolves came. We healed the earth and the sky and the creatures that lived upon them. We were loved. We were worshipped." The images showed a civilization of beauty and peace, cities of white stone, gardens that bloomed in every season, people who lived without fear or want. And then the wolves came. The images changed. War, fire, blood, the white cities burning, the gardens withering, the healers dying one by one as the wolves hunted them to extinction. "They feared our power," the seer continued. "They could not understand a strength that came from healing rather than destruction. So they destroyed us instead, all but a few who fled to the edges of the world and hid." Her pale eyes found Elara's. The last of the great healers was a woman named Elindra. She was bonded to the first Wolf King, just as you are bonded to his descendant. She loved him, despite everything. And he loved her. What happened to her? He killed her. The seer's voice held no emotion, but the words struck like blows, not because he wanted to, but because his brother convinced him that her power was a threat, that she would corrupt their children, that she would destroy everything the wolves had built. The images showed a woman with hair like autumn wheat, eyes filled with love and then with betrayal, hands reaching toward a man whose face was twisted with anguish as he drove a blade through her heart. With her dying breath, Elindra spoke a curse. The seer's voice grew softer. She cursed the king who had killed her and all his descendants. She wove her hatred into the very essence of the Alpha power, creating a poison that would lie dormant for generations, waiting for the moment when another healer would bond with another king. "Moonfire, moonfire," the seer nodded. "It awakens when the bond forms. It feeds on the connection between healer and wolf, and it cannot be destroyed by any power in this world." "Then there is no hope," Elara whispered. "The king will die, and I will die with him. I did not say that." The seer moved around the pool until she stood on the opposite side, her reflection shimmering on the water between them. "The moonfire cannot be destroyed," she repeated, but it can be satisfied. The curse was born from imbalance, from the king taking everything from his bonded mate and giving nothing in return. It feeds on that imbalance, growing stronger as the king bears his burdens alone. But if the balance were restored, Elara's mind raced, connecting the pieces. If someone were to share his burden, not just part of it, but all of it. Every wound he has ever suffered, every sin he carries, every weight upon his soul, every wound. The seer's pale eyes gleamed. Every sin, every weight. You understand correctly. To break the curse, you must take upon yourself the full measure of what it means to be king. Not for a moment, not symbolically, but truly and completely. You must become the vessel for 1,000 years of guilt and pain. That would kill me. It might. The seer spread her hands. The old blood is strong in you, stronger than in anyone born in 5 centuries. You might survive, or the weight might crush your soul and leave your body an empty shell. There is no way to know until you try. Elara stared at the water, watching the images fade until only her own reflection remained. And if I do not try, then the curse will complete itself. The king will die. You will die with him. And the Alpha power will pass to his brother, who will use it to wage war upon your people until not a single human remains in Valdris. The choice was no choice at all. How do I do it? Elara asked. The seer gestured toward the pool. You drink, she said. The water of this pool is connected to the bond between you and the king. Through it, you can reach across any distance, touch his essence directly, take what he carries. But be warned, once you begin, you cannot stop. The curse will not allow half measures. Either you take everything, or you take nothing at all. Elara looked at the pool. The water was perfectly clear, perfectly still, and somehow utterly terrifying. She thought of Kael, dying in his palace, fighting a battle he could not win. She thought of the visions she had seen through the bond, the boy who had never wanted to be king, the man who had carried the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders for decades. She thought of his eyes, gold and fierce, and somehow lonely, and the way his heart beat in rhythm with hers. She thought of her mother, who had taught her that every life was worth saving. And she knelt beside the pool. "Tell me what to do," she said. The ritual began at midnight. Elara knelt at the edge of the pool, her hands submerged in water that was colder than ice yet did not freeze her flesh. The pale seer stood behind her, chanting in a language that predated human memory, words that seemed to reshape the air itself. Outside the cave, Commander Theron waited in the frozen darkness, unable to enter, unable to help, able only to trust that the woman he had come to respect would find a way to survive. The first vision came without warning. Elara found herself standing on a battlefield, the ground beneath her feet slick with blood. Around her, wolves and humans tore at each other with weapons and claws, the air filled with screams and the stench of death. She recognized nothing, yet she knew somehow that this was the Red War, seen through Kael's eyes. He stood at the center of the carnage, a sword in each hand, his golden eyes blazing with an intensity that seemed inhuman. He fought not with joy or rage, but with a terrible, focused determination, each movement precise and lethal. Bodies fell before him like wheat before a scythe, and with every kill, Elara felt his guilt. It crashed over her like a wave, the weight of every life he had ended, every family he had destroyed, every future he had cut short. She gasped, struggling to breathe, struggling to stay upright as the emotion threatened to overwhelm her. But she did not stop. "Take it," the seer's voice echoed from somewhere far away. "Take all of it." Elara reached deeper, pulling the guilt into herself, making it hers. The pain was excruciating, like fire spreading through her veins, but she held on. She had suffered pain before. She had survived things that should have killed her. She would survive this too. The visions continued. She saw Kael as a young man, standing over the body of his father, with blood on his hands that was not his own. She felt his grief, his rage, his desperate need to understand why the woman he loved had done this terrible thing. She saw him kneeling before the throne, accepting the alpha power as it flooded through him, feeling it remake him into something more than human. She felt his fear, his uncertainty, his longing for a life he would never have. She saw him standing on a hilltop, watching an army march toward Ashford Valley, knowing what was about to happen and being powerless to stop it. She felt his anguish, his self-hatred, his bitter certainty that he would never be forgiven for the choice he had not made, but would forever bear the blame for. Every memory, every emotion, every weight upon his soul flowed through the pool and into her, and with each one, a scar appeared on her skin. They began as faint lines, barely visible, but grew brighter and more defined as the ritual continued. They traced patterns across her arms, her shoulders, her back, each one a record of pain that had once belonged to the king. Some were straight and clean, the marks of blades. Others were jagged and irregular, the scars of claws or fire. Still others were not visible wounds at all, but something deeper, marks that glowed with a soft silver light. The scars of guilt, the scars of grief, the scars of a man who had spent his entire life fighting and had never known peace. Elara took them all. The night wore on. The water in the pool grew darker, filling with something that was not quite blood, but served the same purpose. The pale seer's chanting grew louder, more urgent, as though racing against a deadline only she could perceive. And in the palace of Valdris, 100 miles away, the Alpha King opened his eyes. The moonfire was receding. He could feel it, the cold darkness that had been consuming him for months, suddenly withdrawing, retreating from his heart like a tide going out. The black veins that had spread across his chest began to fade, their pulsing light dimming and then disappearing entirely. But in their place, he felt something else. Pain. Not his own pain, but pain that flowed through the bond like a river of fire. Pain that he recognized as his memories, his guilt, his burdens, being pulled from him and taken by someone else. Elara. He tried to stand, tried to reach for her through the bond, tried to stop what was happening, but his body would not obey. The healing that was occurring was too complete, too overwhelming. He could only lie there, helpless, as the woman he had come to love sacrificed herself to save him. "No," he whispered, "not like this." But the bond carried no response, only the steady, terrible flow of everything he was being drawn out of him. The ritual ended at dawn. Elara collapsed beside the pool, her body trembling, her skin covered in scars that glowed like constellations against her flesh. She had stopped counting them somewhere around the 100th. There were too many to count, too many to comprehend. But she was alive. She drew a shaking breath, then another, feeling her heart beat steadily in her chest. The water in the pool was black now, corrupted by the curse it had drawn from the king. Even as she watched, it began to evaporate, rising as dark mist that dispersed into nothing. The moonfire was gone. You survived. The pale seer stood over her, those milk-white eyes showing something that might have been wonder. "In 1,000 years, I have never seen anyone take so much and live." Elara tried to speak, but her voice would not come. Her throat was raw, as though she had been screaming for hours. Perhaps she had been. She could not remember. The seer knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her forehead. "Rest now," she said. "The hardest part is over, but you are not finished yet." "What do you mean?" "The curse is broken, but its architect remains." The seer's voice grew serious. "Lord Kalin will not accept what you have done. He will see the king's survival as a threat to everything he has worked for. If you do not return quickly, he will use your absence to seize power by force." Elara forced herself to sit up, ignoring the protests of muscles that had been pushed far beyond their limits. "How long have I been here?" 3 days. The seer helped her to her feet. "The commander has been waiting outside the entire time. He would not leave, despite the cold, despite the danger. 3 days. That meant Kalin had had 3 days to plot, to scheme, to turn the nobles against the king. 3 days to poison minds and gather forces. It might already be too late. "Can you walk?" the seer asked. Elara took a step, then another. Her legs trembled but held. "I can walk," she said. "I can ride. I can do whatever is necessary, then go." The seer pressed something into her hand, a small vial filled with liquid that glowed faintly silver. "When you face the king's brother, drink this. It will give you the strength to do what must be done." What is it? The last gift of the old blood. The power that was taken from us by the wolves, refined and purified over 1,000 years of isolation. It will not last long, but for a few moments, you will be what the healers of old once were. Elara looked at the vial, feeling its warmth against her palm. "Will it be enough?" "That," the seer said quietly, "depends entirely on you." The journey back to Valdris took 4 days instead of 7. Elara pushed her horse to its limits, sleeping only when exhaustion threatened to pull her from the saddle, eating only when Commander Theron forced food into her hands. The scars on her body had faded somewhat, no longer glowing as brightly as they had in the aftermath of the ritual, but they were still visible beneath her skin, permanent reminders of what she had taken upon herself. Through the bond, she could feel Kael growing stronger as she drew closer. The connection that had faded to a whisper during her time with the seer was now a steady pulse, warm and alive in a way it had not been since the moonfire first appeared. He was waiting for her. He knew she was coming. But she could also feel something else. Tension, fear, the sense of a kingdom on the edge of violence. Theron confirmed her suspicions when they stopped to rest on the 3rd night. "Scouts," he said, returning from a reconnaissance of the road ahead. "Kaelin's men. They are watching all the approaches to the capital. He knows we are coming. He knows something is coming." Theron settled beside the small fire they had built, his face grim in the flickering light. "My guess is that he does not know what happened with the seer. He only knows that the moonfire has retreated and that you disappeared shortly before it did. He will assume I am responsible. He will assume the old blood is responsible, which means he will try to kill you before you reach the palace." Elara stared into the flames. "Then we do not approach by the roads." She outlined a plan that had been forming in her mind since they left the exile lands. It was dangerous, perhaps even reckless, but it was the only way she could see to reach the palace without fighting through an army. Theron listened in silence. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You are asking me to trust you with my life," he said finally. "I am asking you to trust me with the king's life, and your own, and the future of Valdris." The commander looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. 35 years I have served beside Kael," he said slowly. "I have watched him grow from a frightened boy into a man worthy of the crown. I have seen him make decisions that cost him everything, and I have seen him bear burdens that would break lesser men." He paused. "In all that time, I have never seen anyone who could match him, who could stand beside him as an equal, until now." He rose, extending his hand to help her to her feet. "I will follow your plan, Elara of Ashford Valley. Not because I believe it will work, but because I believe in you." She took his hand and let him pull her up. "Then let us hope that belief is enough." They entered the palace through the old tunnels. Elara had learned of their existence from the documents she had studied in the first days after her arrival. They were ancient, predating the Iron Vein dynasty, carved into the bedrock beneath the mountain by the healers who had once ruled these lands. Most had collapsed or been sealed over the centuries, but one remained passable, emerging in the depths of the palace where only ghosts and memories dwelt. The tunnels were dark and cold, filled with the smell of damp stone and ages of neglect. But they were also empty. No guards patrolled these forgotten passages. No eyes watched from the shadows. They emerged in the old wing, the same section of the palace where Elara had first met the king. The corridor was silent, the torches burning low, the air heavy with the weight of history. Through the bond, she could feel Kael. He was close now, so close that she could almost hear his heartbeat with her physical ears. He was alive. He was waiting. But he was not alone. The throne room doors stood open, and from within came the sound of voices raised in anger. Elara moved toward them, Theron at her side. The scene that greeted her was worse than she had feared. Kael stood at the base of the royal dais, flanked by a handful of guards who remained loyal. He was pale, weakened by the ordeal of the past months, but his eyes burned with the gold fire of an alpha who would not yield. Across from him, commanding the center of the room, stood Kaelin with a force of soldiers that outnumbered the king's defenders, 3-1. The Lords of the Moon filled the gallery above, watching the confrontation with expressions that ranged from horror to barely concealed satisfaction. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment when the succession would be decided once and for all. "Your time is finished, brother," Kaelin was saying, his voice carrying the cold certainty of a man who believed he had already won. "The Moonfire may have retreated, but you are still weak, still unfit to rule. Step aside now, and I will show you mercy." "Mercy." Kael's voice was rough, but it held no fear. "You poisoned me with a curse that should have killed me. You have spent 20 years plotting to steal what the power itself deemed you unworthy to hold, and now you speak of mercy? I speak of reality." Kaelin spread his hands. "Look around you. Your guards are outnumbered. Your nobles have abandoned you. Even your precious human healer has fled, disappearing into the wilderness rather than face the consequences of her witchcraft." Kael's jaw tightened. She did not flee. Then where is she? Kaelin smiled, the expression of a predator who sees his prey weakening. "Where is the woman who was supposed to save you? Where is the old blood that was meant to break the curse?" "Here." Elara's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Every head in the room turned toward the entrance where she stood. She was still wearing the travel-stained clothes of her journey, her hair tangled from days of riding, her face gaunt from exhaustion and the aftermath of the ritual. But her eyes burned with a light that made even the bravest soldiers step back. And behind her, visible to all, the scars of the king's burdens glowed silver against her skin. The silence that followed her entrance was absolute. Elara walked forward, her boots echoing against the marble floor. The soldiers parted before her, unable to meet her gaze. Even Kaelin's most loyal men seemed uncertain, their hands hovering near their weapons, but making no move to draw them. She stopped in the center of the room, equidistant between the two brothers. 3 days ago," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber, "I traveled to the exile lands and found the Pale Seer. I learned the true origin of the Moonfire curse, and I took upon myself every burden the king has ever carried, breaking the curse at its source." "Impossible," Kaelin said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "The Moonfire cannot be cured. The Moonfire has been satisfied." Elara turned to face him, and for the first time he saw the scars that covered her arms, her shoulders, every inch of visible skin. "I took his wounds, his guilt, his pain, all of it. The curse wanted balance, and I gave it balance. Now it is gone." The murmurs from the gallery grew louder. The Lords of the Moon leaned forward, studying the woman who had done what every healer in history had deemed impossible. "You lie," Kaelin said. "This is another trick, another deception from the old blood. Then test it." Elara moved toward Kael, stopping before him. She reached up and pulled aside the collar of his shirt, revealing his shoulder. Where the Moonfire wound had been, there was nothing. No black veins, no corrupted flesh, only healthy skin, unmarked and whole. "The curse is broken," she said. "The king is healed. Your plot has failed." Kaelin stared at his brother's shoulder, his face going pale. For a moment, something like genuine shock flickered in his amber eyes. Then the expression hardened into something far more dangerous. "It does not matter," he said. "The king is still weak, still compromised. And you," he turned his gaze on Elara, "you are still a threat that must be eliminated." He drew his sword. "Kill them both," he commanded. "Kill them now, before the old blood can work its poison again." The soldiers hesitated. "I gave you an order," Kaelin snarled. "Obey it or share their fate." Slowly, reluctantly, the soldiers began to advance. The soldiers advanced, their weapons gleaming in the torchlight. Elara reached for the vial in her pocket, but before she could draw it out, Kael moved. He should not have been able to stand, let alone fight. The Moonfire had ravaged his body for months. The ritual that had drawn his burdens into Elara had left him hollow, emptied of the strength that had defined him for decades. But he stood anyway. He stepped in front of Elara, drawing his sword with hands that trembled from the effort. The blade was heavy in his grip, far heavier than it had ever been before. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. He did not care. "You want her," he said, his voice raw but unwavering. "You go through me first." The soldiers hesitated. They knew he was weakened. They knew he could barely lift his sword, but they also knew who he was, what he had been, and some instincts ran deeper than logic. "Your Majesty," one of them said uncertainly, "please stand aside. Our orders." "Your orders come from a traitor who poisoned his own brother." Kael raised his sword, and though his arms shook with the strain, his eyes burned with the gold fire of an alpha who had never learned to surrender. "I am still your king, and I am telling you now, any man who touches her dies." He would lose this fight. He knew it. They knew it. But he would take some of them with him. Enough to give Elara time to escape, to run, to find another way. Commander Theron moved to stand beside him, sword drawn, placing himself at his king's right hand, as he had done for 35 years. "I count 12, the commander said quietly. "We have faced worse odds. We were younger then. We were stupider then." Theron allowed himself a small smile. "Now we are wiser. We know that some things are worth dying for." Kael glanced at Elara, who stood behind them with the vial still hidden in her hand. "Run if you can," he told her through the bond. "Live. That is the only thing that matters." She felt his determination, his willingness to sacrifice himself so that she might escape. She felt his love, finally acknowledged, finally allowed to exist, and she felt her answer rising in her heart. No. She stepped forward, moving between Kael and the soldiers, and drew the vial from her pocket. "You have spent your entire life protecting others," she said aloud. "Now it is my turn. Elara, trust me." She drank. The power hit her like a thunderbolt. Silver light exploded from her body, filling the throne room with radiance that made the torches seem like dim candles. The soldiers cried out, shielding their eyes, stumbling backward as the brilliance washed over them. But Elara did not stop there. She reached out through the bond, not just to Kael, but to the very essence of the alpha power itself. She could feel it responding to her call, recognizing in her the old blood that had once ruled these lands. It was not fighting her, it was welcoming her. And through that connection, she spoke. "Wolves of Valdris." Her voice echoed with a resonance that was not entirely human. The words carried to every corner of the palace, to every soldier and noble and servant within its walls. "Hear me now. I am Elara of Ashford Valley. I am the bearer of the old blood, and I am the bonded mate of your king." The light intensified. "For 1,000 years, your people and mine have been at war. We have killed each other, hated each other, feared each other. But it does not have to be this way. The bond between your king and me is proof that wolves and humans can stand together, that we can build something greater than either could build alone." She turned to face Kaelin, who stood frozen in the silver radiance. "Lord Kaelin believes that peace is impossible. He believes that the only way forward is to destroy everything that is different, everything that frightens him. But fear is not wisdom, and destruction is not strength." She walked toward him, and with every step, the light around her grew brighter. "I have taken upon myself the burdens of your king. I have carried the weight of 1,000 years of war. And I tell you now that I am tired of fighting, tired of death, tired of hatred that serves no purpose except to breed more hatred." She stopped before Kaelin, close enough to touch. "You tried to kill your brother with a curse born from the hatred of my ancestors. But I have broken that curse with something your ancestors never understood, with love, with sacrifice, with the willingness to bear another's pain so that they might live." Kaelin's sword trembled in his grip, but his eyes, those pale amber eyes that had always burned with certainty, now flickered with something else. "You are a monster," he whispered, "a corruption, everything I have ever feared made flesh." "No." Elara's voice was gentle now, almost sad. "I am what happens when we choose to see each other as people instead of enemies. I am the bridge that your fear has always prevented you from crossing. Fear." The word struck him like a blow. He had spent his entire life denying that fear drove him, insisting that his actions were born from logic, from necessity, from the hard wisdom of experience. But standing before this woman who should have been dead, who should have been broken, who instead radiated a power that made his own soldiers cower, he could not maintain the lie any longer. "You know nothing of my fear," he said, but his voice cracked. "I know everything," Elara replied. "The Pale Seer showed me the truth, about your mother, about what you did when you were 15 years old." Kaelin went pale. She showed me a boy who watched his father die and believed his mother was responsible. A boy who found a ritual in a forbidden book and convinced himself that killing his own mother was the only way to save his family. A boy who has spent 40 years trying to justify that choice because the alternative is admitting that he murdered an innocent woman for nothing. Stop. She was not a threat, Kaelin. Your mother was not planning to destroy your family. She loved your father. She loved you. And you killed her because you were 15 and terrified and no one was there to tell you that your fear was lying to you. I said stop! Kaelin raised his sword, but his hand shook so violently that he could barely hold it. The silver light around Elara intensified, and in its glow, shadows seemed to move. Shadows that took the shape of a woman with gentle eyes and dark hair. Kaelin stumbled backward, his face contorting with horror. "No," he gasped. "No, you cannot be here. You are dead. I made sure you were dead." The shadow did not speak. It simply stood there, watching him, with an expression that held no anger, no accusation. Only sorrow. "Mother." The word came out as a sob. "Mother, I am sorry. I did not know. I did not understand." Elara watched as the most powerful lord in Valdris fell to his knees before a ghost that might have been real or might have been born from his own guilty conscience. Either way, the result was the same. The sword clattered to the floor. 40 years, Kaelin whispered, tears streaming down his face. 40 years I have tried to make it right, tried to protect our people from the threat I believed was real. But it was never about protection, was it? It was about proving that I was not a monster, that what I did was justified. He looked up at Elara, and for the first time she saw the boy behind the man, the terrified child who had made an irreversible choice and spent a lifetime building walls to hide from its consequences. "I cannot undo what I have done," he said. "I cannot bring her back. I cannot bring any of them back." "No," Elara agreed, "but you can choose what happens next." She reached out and placed her hand on his head, a gesture that was almost maternal. "Your brother is not your father. He never believed your mother was a threat. He has spent 20 years trying to prove her innocence because he knew, deep in his heart, that she was incapable of the crime she was accused of." Kaelin flinched. "And you?" Elara continued. "You are not the boy who made that terrible choice. You have lived 40 years since then. You have learned. You have suffered. You have watched the consequences of hatred unfold again and again. The question now is whether you will continue down that path or choose a different one." She withdrew her hand and stepped back. "I forgive you for what you tried to do to me," she said. "Not because you deserve it, but because carrying hatred is exhausting, and I have carried enough burdens for one lifetime. But my forgiveness is not what you need." She glanced at the shadow that still lingered at the edge of the light. Hers is. Kaelin turned to look at the shape of his mother, and whatever he saw in those phantom eyes broke something inside him. The walls he had built, the justifications he had constructed, the armor of righteousness he had worn for 40 years, all of it crumbled in a single moment. He bowed his head. "I choose," he said, his voice broken but clear. "I choose to try. Not because I believe I can be forgiven, but because I cannot keep living this way. I cannot keep destroying everything I touch, because I am too afraid to admit that I was wrong." The shadow flickered once, then faded, leaving only the silver light and the silence. Elara looked at the man kneeling before her and felt something she had not expected. Compassion. "Then stand," she said, "and begin." 1 year later. Elara stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, watching the sun set over a kingdom transformed. The streets below were alive with activity. Wolves and humans worked side by side on the construction of a new marketplace, their voices mingling in a harmony that would have been unthinkable 12 months ago. Children of both races chased each other through the square, their laughter rising like music toward the evening sky. It was not perfect. There had been setbacks, conflicts, moments when the old hatreds threatened to resurface. There would be more such moments in the years to come. But they had endured. They had built something worth protecting. Cale moved to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. The moonfire scars on his shoulder had faded to faint silver lines, matching the marks that still traced patterns across her skin. They would carry those reminders forever, both of them. Proof of what they had survived, proof of what they had overcome. Kalen's proposal passed the council today, he said. Joint settlements in the Northern Territories, wolves and humans living together. I heard. She leaned against his shoulder. It is a good beginning. He has a long way to go. We all do. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights flicker to life as darkness crept across the land. The first stars were appearing, faint points of brilliance against the deepening blue. Through the bond, Elara felt the steady rhythm of his heart. It beat in perfect time with her own, as it had since the night they first touched. Two people who had found each other against all odds. Two lives woven together by choice as much as magic. The prophecy spoke of a child who would save both races, she said quietly. Do you think it was always meant to be this way? I think, Cale replied, that prophecies only show possibilities. It is our choices that make them real. He turned her to face him, his golden eyes warm in the fading light. I spent 40 years believing I had to carry everything alone, that asking for help was weakness, that letting anyone see my pain put them in danger. And now? Now I know better. He smiled, and it transformed his face, softening the hard lines that decades of war and grief had carved. Strength is not the absence of need. It is the wisdom to share your burdens with those who are strong enough to help you carry them. He pulled her close, and she went willingly, fitting against him as though they had been designed for each other. Perhaps they had been. Thank you, he murmured against her hair, for saving me. We saved each other. Outside, the wolves began to howl, not in mourning, not in warning, but in celebration. The sound rolled across the mountains and through the valleys, carrying the news to every corner of the kingdom. The curse was broken, the king was healed, and the future, at long last, belonged to them all. Elara closed her eyes, listening to the music of the wolves, feeling the warmth of the man she loved, remembering the long road that had brought them to this moment. She thought of her mother, who had taught her that every life was worth saving. She thought of the soldiers she had healed at River's Bend, enemies and allies alike. She thought of the scars she carried, each one a story of pain transformed into purpose. And she smiled. This was not an ending, she knew. It was a beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight, more bridges to build between worlds that had been enemies for far too long. But for tonight, there was peace. For tonight, there was hope. And in the darkness beyond the palace walls, where the mountains met the stars, something ancient and powerful stirred in recognition. The old blood had found its purpose at last, not to rule, not to conquer, but to heal. And healing, Elara had always known, was the greatest power of all,